Studies Research Matters series. This is something the faculty started to profile and celebrate and acknowledge the wide-ranging research that happens in the Faculty of Liberal Arts and Professional Studies. This is the fourth in our series. We are first ones in our series, and it's going to be focusing on the scholarship on China. We have Administrative Studies, Political Science, History, and a Canada Research Chair on Modern Chinese History today, speaking about the event. Our upcoming events are going to be on Northern Research and Knowledge Mobilization, and we look forward to seeing you there. I'm going to ask Dean Martin Singer to... Yes. Okay.
I'm going to repeat all of it.
Thank you, everyone, for coming today. I'd particularly like to thank the staff and the Associate Dean of the Research Office for all the work they do in preparing for the series that we have put on for liberal arts and professional studies to highlight, acknowledge, and celebrate the wide range of research that happens in liberal arts and professional studies. I'd like to now ask Dean Singer to provide some introductory remarks, and I hope that you will enjoy this event.
Good morning, everyone. And those of you not from York University, welcome to our campus. For those of you from York, and I see many familiar faces, nice to see you again. Some of you will know that I myself have studied China for more than 40 years. About 45 years ago, I think I took my first course on China. And I remember how esoteric a subject that was 45 years ago. The exact year was 1965. It was in 1965, before some of you were born, I know. Don't remind me. When I took my first course with by chance, it was just available and I needed a course at a certain level at a certain time. Those things haven't changed over the last number of years. And it was just a fascinating experience with a very dynamic professor. And that made an incredible impact on me. Before that course, I had no idea that I would ever go to graduate school, and after that course, I decided I might. And after 2 courses with a professor, I decided I was going to go. And in the early days, people were very wondering why would anybody study China? Is there a future in it? My parents especially were very concerned about my future. But I remember feeling vindicated in 1970, which is exactly 40 years ago, when Prime Minister Trudeau surprised everyone by his journey and the relations that he established, which we're going to celebrate later this year, 40th anniversary. And soon after that, as I'm sure most of you will know, President Nixon went to China, which was just a completely unthinkable idea at the time, and that's why it succeeded. And a few years after that, the Canadians in significant number, including some that I brought, started traveling to China, and the first Chinese started coming here. We knew very little about each other 40 years ago, except for some scholars. I remember my first trips to China and how much ignorance there was about Canada, and I remember how much ignorance there was about China in Canada, although there has always been a great deal of interest in China. Now, at the time, York University was a powerhouse of China activity. It was probably, if I want to be partisan, I could say it was the leading center of China studies in Canada. If I wanted to be generous, I could say it was one of the 2 leading centers of China studies in Canada. And we are very pleased to be renewing that commitment to China studies, represented in part by the people that you're meeting here today. Now, I'm the dean of a very new faculty, 6.5 months old, the Faculty of Liberal Arts and Professional Studies. You can't miss it because they have these huge banners everywhere. I think it's probably on your name tag. This faculty has a tremendous wealth of China expertise. But that China expertise extends beyond our faculty to the business school, environmental studies, and many other faculties across this great university. And some of you will know that the president of our university recently visited China. I myself will be going sometime in 2010. Spring or fall is yet to be decided. We are welcoming more and more Chinese students to our campus. We will be sending more and more of our students to China as part of their study experience at York University. So we are thrilled, delighted really, to have this opportunity to host this event, both because it highlights the research strengths of our faculty and York University, but in particular because of the China connection, which is very meaningful to me personally and professionally, and very meaningful to York. And if you have any doubt about the interest in China, look around you. This is probably our best attended of the four research matters so far. So I'm grateful to the panel, and I'm grateful to all of you for showing such an interest. And I promise you that over the next year or two, there are going to be many more opportunities to delve into China, its background, and its relationship to Canada, and to our university and our city. Thank you very much for coming today.
My name is Josh Fogel, and I will be chairing as well as speaking first in a moment. But I just wanted to add my voice to the welcome to everyone. This is one of the bigger crowds that I've ever spoken to as well. And while we do indeed have a wealth of expertise in this panel, if I may be so immodest, I don't want you to get the sense that we have exhausted that expertise, echoing what Dean Singer said a moment ago, exhausted the expertise right here on York's campus. We have 3 people who work on contemporary China and myself who work on history, but we have lots of other people who work on history and literature of China. Chinese culture, for instance, there's a large international project going on right now funded by SSHRC and the Humboldt Foundation in Germany to study Chinese women's journals in the early 20th century. 5 or 6 countries involved in that, scholars from 5 or 6 countries. That's just one of a number of important projects that are being done here. So I guess will now take a second and put on my PowerPoint presentation. Actually, I think I'll sit while I get that. And so give me 1 second here. Now, the great majority, I have to time myself too, the great majority of my work as a scholar, I've been at York now for 4.5 years as a CRC Canada Research Chair in Chinese history. And the great majority of my work has involved the relationship between China and Japan over the past few centuries. And I work from what I consider a very productive notion that you can't neatly separate the histories of China and Japan. They're just so intertwined that they impact one another. I hate using that word as a verb. They influence one another greatly. Most of my research has been in the 19th and 20th century, but I've gotten very interested of late in a much earlier topic. And that's what I'm going to introduce in my 15 minutes. I call it the afterlife of a material object. It's kind of a biography of a material object, the mysterious gold seal, not the kind of seal, but the little kind that you use, of 57 CE or AD. The later Han history, the history of the later Han dynasty, Chinese dynasties each had histories written about them in the subsequent dynasty. And the later Han history recounts, and I'll translate it very quickly, but for those of you who know Chinese, I thought I'd bring it, that in the second year of the Jian Wu Zhongyuan reign, which is 57, an emissary from this state, this is the problem, came to court to pay tribute. Fine. This emissary, third line, called himself something like an emissary or whatever. That state lies, it lies to the extreme south, and Guangwu, that's the emperor down here, presented him with a seal and a ribbon. Okay, now, the Chinese dynastic histories run thousands of pages, and there's all kinds of statements, and that was fine. Nobody knew anything. But then, in the year 1784, as the story goes, a farmer in Kyushu, island in western Japan, was fixing an irrigation ditch when he saw a little shiny object and dug it out, and there it was. Can you all see it there? This seal is about yay big. I have a replica at home I forgot to bring, but it's about 1 inch square and maybe 1.25 inches tall with that coiled snake as a handle. The purple ribbon would have gone through here, but it of course disintegrated a long, long time ago, though the seal is in perfect condition. It's in a museum in Japan, which I visited about this time last year. And it bears this inscription. It's a seal that's been given to the king of the state of, again, the problem under the Han. This has been considered a great honor to receive this seal. Now, here are the two statements back to back. And for those of you who know Chinese, you already see the problem, which has set off 225 years of scholarship. The state here is mentioned like this, and it is mentioned here with one little addition. This part of the character. So, I'm not going to get too technical because I know this is not a sinological group, but this has set off, as I say, 225 years of debate. Something like 300 books and articles have been written about the gold seal. Most of them, almost all of them, by Japanese scholars. And in order to make sense of it, here's a better look at it, and you can see what the face looks like. Of course, this is much larger than life. There's another view of it. It was issued as a postage stamp in 1989 in Japan. In order to make sense out of this long history, I've divided up the scholarship on it into 4 segments, each of which I found a truly seminal piece of writing, either an article or a book, which if it's short enough, I've translated and then commented on it. If it's longer, I've summarized in detail. And the very first piece that was written about it, what happens is this farmer, as I said, didn't know what he had. Of course, he wasn't terribly literate. He showed it to his brother, who was equally literate. And they showed it to somebody else who eventually it came to the hands of the local magistrate who could read and write quite well, but didn't know what he had. So he called in a local scholar, this guy, Kame Nanme, who was extremely famous in his day, although now he's only known to specialists, who looked at it and knew immediately what it was because he knew these texts, these, like the top one there, is part of his mental architecture. And he knew immediately what they had. And he offered to buy it. But they said, no, that's not how it works. We have to present it to the daimyo, to the feudal lord, which is what did happen. So he was asked to come up with an authentication of it, which he did. And then he wrote a kind of a long essay about it, explaining its importance, and in a question and answer form, which is a typical Chinese and Japanese form of writing, estimating the kinds of, trying to guess the kinds of questions that people would have about it, and then answering them. It's the most extraordinary piece of writing I have ever read in Japanese. It literally brought tears to my eyes. I mean, I say that, you're spending half your time when you do this work in and out of dictionaries and online and all the rest of it, so it's not exactly it. But it's a beautiful piece. Anyway, he came up with a theory about it, why it lasted. He anticipated every question that almost every question that subsequent scholarship would throw in the face of this piece. And immediately, a debate was set off, and numerous people started writing essays, short essays generally. Now you have to remember, 1784 in Japan, obviously no telephone, no fax, no email, no computers, and on top of that, people were not even allowed to travel unrestricted. So how did things get from one place to another so fast? Within the first year or two of the discovery of the seal, there's no newspapers, there's no anything. Within a year or two, there are 15 essays written about this. And within 3 or 4 years, there's twice that many. Word got out, and people are writing about it, of course, who have never even seen it. But they've seen drawings of it, they've heard about it. And you get a series of essays which try to explain, at first, what that inscription means. And there's really only so much you can say, because for those of you who know Chinese, this is completely transparent, and these last two characters are completely transparent. There's no way to have a second opinion on it. These two characters are not, and that's where the debate is. Who was this entity that came from what we now call Japan to China? Who were they? Who are those guys? And it's that debate continues. To this day, there is a general consensus, but if you actually look carefully, plenty of people disagree with the general consensus. And so, basically what you find in this first of the 4 periods that I've divided these last 200 plus years into, you have the Confucianist scholars who claim one thing and are very proud of the fact that this item is the first known material object to pass from the hands of a Chinese court to a quote-unquote Japanese entity. It is the first material. There are things that preceded, we know that, but this is the first one that's attested in the written record. So that's very, very important. Add to that the fact, this is the first time that Chinese writing is known to come to Japan. And this is something our friend Kamename is virtually ecstatic about. Civilization comes to Japan, not entirely contained within the seal, but as a result of the seal is the, shall we say, the first step in that process. So the Confucianists are very happy about this. They're not at all troubled by things that other groups in Japan, nativist scholars, are very troubled by this. They don't want anybody in Japan, they don't want to rewrite the history in such a way that shows any state in Japan, least of all the whole country, accepting some sort of second-class status vis-a-vis China. So they have to read the seal a different way. So immediately, what I'm saying is immediately the inscription on the seal and the seal itself become tied up with the issue of what it means to be Japanese in the late 18th century. Now, of course, the whole notion of Japan is a much later thing. Right? We tend to take the notion of the nation state as we have acquired it in sort of the 19th and 20th century and then focus it all the way back to the 1st century when this seal was produced. And no such thing existed at the time. In my own work on this, I don't refer to China, Japan, and Korea at that time. I talk about the archipelago, the peninsula, and the mainland. Because these entities, China, Japan, and Korea, are much later phenomena. In any event, so that's the nature of the debate. They each have their sets of classics, the nativists and the Confucianists. That is their basis for truth, wherever it is, in the Confucian classics or in the Japanese classics, and that's it. But then, about a century after the seal is discovered, a scholar comes along in 1892, a professor in Tokyo, and he writes a very short and utterly brilliant essay effectively solving what that inscription means, tying it into Chinese and Japanese historical records, and it's a paradigm-shifting essay. And the whole debate shifts now. Because now the people, and actually a handful of scholars, say, I used to believe that the seal, the inscription should be understood this way, but now since Professor Miyake's essay has been published, I changed my mind. I see God. I convert. And it's quite astounding. And these are not slouches. I'm talking about major figures. And so the debate shifts that way. And now, this is the middle of the Meiji period in Japan. It's the coming of Central European historiographical methods to Japan. No longer do we base our conclusions for authentication in a set of classics, but now it's based in philology. Philology is the new religion, if you will. And he uses all sorts of interesting philological methods to prove his thesis on the reading. Skipping ahead, it's not until the 1960s when we get another sort of paradigm shifting essay. This model of paradigm shifting and so on can only work so far. But at that point, a scholar, a very famous scholar who passed away some years ago, actually had an opportunity to see the seal. It had been hidden away in the archive of the Lord and the Son, after the dissolution of the old system, in the family's archive. It hadn't been in public for a long, long time. And in I think it was 65, he had access to the seal, and he uses, with the help of scientists, all kinds of scientific methods to measure the seal to the 1,000th place, to weigh it to the 1,000th of a gram, to figure out its percentage of gold. And now science comes in, and science is supposed to sweep away all the doubts based on things like, belief in a classical text of the Bible or whatever. None of this philological stuff. Science is here now. It's really gold. It's 95-point-something% gold. It's exactly this, and it fits exactly in this way. And it's quite an interesting essay in its own self. Finally, I only have a couple of minutes. I was treating the fourth period that I'm about to mention to you as a third and a half until someone said to me recently, no, it's a full fourth-fledged. In late 2006, a scholar at a university in Japan, scholar of ancient Japanese literature, published a little book, 200-plus page book, in which he attempted to show, soup to nuts, the whole story is a fabrication. The whole gold seal is a fake. Now, there have been people before who have claimed it's a fake, but they didn't have, he names names. He explains who the bad guys are, who are the people who fabricated it, and he's got to explain that now. It's the most inordinately detailed conspiracy theory. It's not just somebody made it up, it's a fake because of X. No, he's got to tell us how it is. He said, this guy did it. He said this guy, and he said, wait a second, we're all conditioned to think that merchants do bad things for money. But why can't scholars do bad things too? And he says, this guy did it. And he attempts to show that he had contacts with seal forgers, it sounds, literally seal forgers, people who made seals, who inscribed them to make them look good. And so then you say to yourself, if he's so smart, why isn't this moving? If he's so smart, why didn't he make this character exactly the same as that? Questions like, but he's already got answers to those questions, so don't even try to second guess the conspiracy theorists. They're always one step ahead of the game. And he said, and he goes on and on, it's a brilliant book. He said, if I'm wrong, all I have to do is get a bunch of scientists in here, we can shoot some x-rays through it or something, and we'll know whether it's 200 years old or 2,000 years old, right? But the government doesn't want to do that. No, they don't want to do it because what will happen? Tourism goes down the drain. Who's going to come to look at a 200-year-old forgery? It's the whole relationship with China. No. He says, let them do it. I'll take my chances. And if I'm wrong, I will go to the grave of Kame Name, drop to my knees, and beg his spirit to issue an apology, a post-mortem apology. That theory is still being batted around. I think it's way overstated, but it's terribly interesting. Terribly interesting. My own work is trying to put this all together, try to understand these 4 stages. And I've just used up my 15 minutes, so I'm going to now thank you all for listening and move on to introduce our second speaker today. Professor Li is professor of marketing here at York, where he's been here for about 10 years now. Interested in questions of marketing managers, international trade, marketing strategies. The title of his talk today is, well, you all have this too in front of you, but Chinese Firms' Competitive Advantage in the World Market. And I don't want to take up any of your time, so why don't you take my seat?
It's okay, I can stand there.
You want to stand?
Okay, my presentation is based on one of my published papers. I have left a pile of the paper there, so after presentation, if you like this, please feel free to take one copy. My presentation today is about the Chinese companies' competitive advantages in the world market. When we talk about Chinese companies, a lot of people will think about will think of the Chinese food, Chinese restaurant. I overheard a conversation between two of my students last night in my class. One student was Chinese, the other was Jewish. The Chinese, they were talking about their culture, their history. The Chinese student was very proud. He said, well, we Chinese have 4,000 years history. The Jewish student said, well, 4,000 years history is nothing. The Jewish have 5,000 years history. The Chinese student was shocked. He said, it was impossible. Where did the Jewish people get kicked out in the first 1,000 years? Chinese companies do not just make food. They do not just run restaurants. They make a lot of made-in-China products. Today, made-in-China products are an important part of our life. Say this, take this classroom as an example. We have a microphone, we have desk, we have tables, we have pens, we have screen. I believe most of these are made in China. So why Chinese companies have become so dominant in some industries? That's what we are going to discuss today. So today we want to address those research questions. First, what are Chinese companies' competitive advantages in the world market? Now some people will say, well, the answer for this question is easy, right? Chinese companies enjoy low cost of labor. But if the answer is so simple, so straightforward, then how can we answer the second one? Why can't other developing countries achieve the same advantages? Other developing countries like Vietnam, like Bangladesh, they also enjoy the same low cost of labor, if not lower. But why can't those developing countries achieve the same advantages? If we go to Walmart, sometimes we do see made in Vietnam products, made in Bangladesh products. But in terms of the volume, it's not as much as Chinese volume. The third question would be a bit more difficult to answer. Why can't those developing countries duplicate the Chinese competitive advantage? Now, before we answer those questions, let's see what's going on in China. The Chinese economy is the third largest in the world, only after the United States and Japan. Its GDP was 4.9 trillion US dollars in 2009. Now, some studies indicated that China, the Chinese economy should be in the second position now. And I cannot confirm that because the Japanese government will release their numbers in February. So we have to wait for a few weeks to confirm that. And I have to skip some slides because you see there's a card there, 1 minute card holding.
Not yet.
Now I want to review very briefly the literature about the competitive advantage. The basic competitive advantage theory suggests that if a company wants to enjoy competitive advantage, it must be unique in terms of cost or in terms of quality. We call the first one cost leadership, the second one differentiation. Now, how to be unique in terms of cost or in terms of differentiation? The theory suggests that a company must rely on bundles of resources. Bundles means a company should not rely on one resource. It should be rely on a number of different resources in combination. Those resources must be important, valuable, rare, and difficult for competitors to duplicate. If the competitors can duplicate your resources, you are the same, you are not unique anymore. So how to make it difficult for the competitors to duplicate your resources? You must combine and recombine your resources continuously. In other words, you have to upgrade your resources continuously. The next concept suggests that for a nation to be competitive in the market, it must have advantages in those 4 areas. First one, the red box, is input resources. You must have at least reasonable human resources, capital resources, and technology resources. The green box is the competition. You must have strong competition at home. Competition is good because competition forces companies to be better, to improve. Another area, the yellow box, is related and supporting industries. You must have good suppliers if you want to make good quality products. If you want to make the good quality final products, you must have good suppliers to provide high quality components or materials. The last one, the blue box, is demand. You must have strong home demand so you can sell your products at home. That means you can achieve economies of scale. That means cost reduction. Another concept suggests that differentiates first mover from the copycat. First mover means those companies, they are the first to develop a new product or a new technology. Now, if you are the first company, you are pioneer. You enjoy image advantages, you enjoy brand loyalty advantages. Customers believe you are great, they will stay with your brands. Now, if you are a copycat, in business literature we call copycat free rider. If you are a copycat, you also enjoy those competitive advantages. First, your product will be accurate because on average about 70 to 80% of new products fail in the market. If you are a copycat, you only copy the successful products. So your products are more accurate. Second, lower cost. On average, a copycat's R&D cost is only about 60% of the R&D cost of innovator, of pioneers. Now, based on those concepts, let's see what the Chinese companies have been doing. Chinese companies have gone through 3 stages. The first stage is the founding stage. At this stage, the company is created, is born, is founded. So the company is new. When the company is new, it is not efficient because the major functions inside the company are not well coordinated. The labor force, the R&D people are not efficient, are not experienced. So the company is not efficient. At this stage, Chinese companies rely on those resources to achieve efficiency. First, low-cost labor. Second, low-cost materials. Third, strong domestic market demand. That means strong home demand. At this stage, because the company is new, its product quality is not that great. But China has a large population. So these new companies can still sell their products, even though the product quality is not that great. Now this is important because when they sell their products, they achieve economies of scale. They reduce their cost. Next, culture. Chinese culture is what we call command culture. A boss can dictate what the subordinates should do. So the owner of a company can force its employees to accept low wages and long working hours. In other words, it means they can reduce cost. Next, related industries. Chinese companies are concentrated in some areas. For example, let's take the Chinese textile companies as an example. Chinese textile companies are concentrated in 3 provinces. First, Guangdong, and then Fujian, and then Zhejiang. Why they are concentrated in those areas? Because in those 3 provinces, they enjoy good quality suppliers. They enjoy skillful labor force. Also, those 3 provinces are very close to Taiwan and Hong Kong, so they get access to investments from those 2 areas, Hong Kong and Taiwan. Also, in those areas, they have tough competition. The competition between them, between the Chinese companies, push them to go further, to improve, to get better. Now, other developing countries may have this, but they don't have this, they don't have this, and they don't have this. Therefore, they cannot duplicate Chinese efficiency at the first stage. The next stage is the growth stage. After 3 to 5 years operation, Chinese companies enter the second stage, growth stage. At this stage, they work with Western partners. They assemble products for Western partners, what we call partnerships. If you take over your iPod, you will find assembled in China. If you buy Nike shoes, you will find made in China. Chinese companies assemble products based on the materials, the design provided by Western companies. Why Chinese companies want to do that? Because they want to learn. By assembling products for Western companies, they copy the Western management skills. They copy technologies. They copy the R&D cost. They copy the R&D competence. This is the second stage. This is the process of learning by doing. They learn by assembling for Western companies. And then the Chinese companies enter the mature stage. This is the third stage. At this stage, the mature Chinese companies develop firm-specific advantages. Firm-specific means they are unique to those firms only. There are two groups here at this stage. The first group compete in cost, and then they compete in prices. If you go to Walmart, you will see that some companies, some Chinese companies are competing in prices there. Another group of Chinese companies do not compete in prices. They compete in quality. They compete in innovation. They learn, they copy technologies. Now they improve. They develop their own technologies. They even buy Western assets. Now I will show you a 1-minute video clip. Let's take the logo as an example. So this group of companies, like Lenovo, they bought Western assets. They bought IBM's computer business, and they copy the technology, they improve further. Not just this company, other Chinese companies are doing the same. 1 minute now. Like for example, some Chinese companies are talking to GM. They want to buy the Hummer business. Other companies are talking to Ford. They want to buy Volvo business. I believe these two deals will be completed this year in 2010. So Chinese companies now are buying the American assets. According to a study, last year Chinese companies invested $3.9 billion buying American assets, nearly 4 times the level in 2008. By comparison, US buyers invested $3 billion into Chinese entities last year, down 80% from 2008. So Lenovo is not just one exception. Many Chinese companies are doing that. They buy, they improve. So what are the Chinese companies' competitive advantage? Why other developing countries cannot duplicate that? Because Chinese competitive advantages depends on a number of different resources. More important, to upgrade those resources in the past dependent fashion. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Our third speaker is Professor David Lumsden, the Department of Anthropology. David's been here since 1971. Is that before you came, Bernie, or after?
I've been here longer than anyone.
So that's almost 40 years. That's quite a period of time. Former master of Norman Bethune College, another name familiar to Chinese historians. Actually, I read here that in September 2008, David was awarded by the Chinese government the winner of the Great Wall Friendship Award. Very nice. The topic of his talk today is researching in a Chinese municipality, Chongqing, which is a city in central China, but I'm sure David will have more to say.
First, I should apologize. My body will shake from time to time. It's out of sheer enthusiasm for things. Thank you for the invitation to participate today. I'm going to talk about researching. When we talk about research, it sounds incredibly and grimly planned in advance. But I want to emphasize the contingencies that sometimes take you in interesting ways over one's career. I started out as a West Africanist. My PhD was about the Volta River Project and its impact on 80,000 people, and particularly on one particular ethnic group that I was interested in. Over 30 years later, I found myself in Chongqing, in the city, and starting to look at an ethnic group affected by the Three Gorges Project. That was one of the things that began to interest me at the time. There is, as Joshua pointed out, a Norman Bethune College connection. That college started out as an Africa-oriented college, at least amongst its fellows. But in 1972, College G became Norman Bethune College. Amazing. If that had not happened, none of this would have happened. I wouldn't be here. I'd be safely at home. So I'm reminded that one of the runner-up names, instead of Norman Bethune, was the College of Pure Light. I'd rather think maybe we should have gone that direction sometime. One of our fellows, Rod Stewart, in 1981, came back from a year as an ESL teacher in a university in Chongqing and asked that the college help bring over his interpreter. That's how the contacts started. That's what happened. And the full story of that particular arrangement later would crop up in a report on Canada-China academic relationships by some Concordia professor called Martin Singh. I became master of Bethune 83 to 1989 and felt that we should be doing something with the People's Republic itself, and tried to build on this early connection of Rod Stewart's with the Sichuan Foreign Languages Institute. But out of the blue, in 1985, Toronto City Hall called me, because this was Norman Bethune College, and said, which city should Toronto twin with in China? It was their initiative, Art Eggleton's initiative, on the belief, correct I think, that city-to-city relations could make their own unique and important connections for international friendship and cooperation. So, in 1985, I was one of 4 people sent over by Toronto City Hall to choose which Chinese city. I was affectionately looking towards Chongqing, and as it happened, it was clear that it was Chongqing that stood out, in fact. Toronto now has 4 sister cities. Chongqing has 12. But I must say, a lot of this activity of mine I didn't see as research. I saw it as Toronto citizenship, as doing my little bit to keep things moving on the world stage. Well, I was able to go briefly to Chongqing in 85, 91, 93, 2005, 2006, 2006, 08. But every year, I mean, those were brief trips, but every year there were 2 or 3 delegations, often at the deputy mayoral level, from Chongqing to Toronto, and that's what one got involved in, hosting, nudging Toronto City Hall to be interested in Chongqing. Some mayors were interested, some were not. One mayor famously, nobody was interested in the Chinese connection. Well, what I'm saying is that over the years one built up some contacts, at least in the city wideband, and sometimes at Toronto City Hall to get things going. Chongqing itself changed over those years, of course, and became in 1997 one of only 4 cities in China, which is a direct municipality directly under the central government, and that led to considerable extra responsibilities for the city. One of the things that happened, of course, was the Three Gorges resettlement aspect. And rather than setting up a province devoted, Sanxia province, devoted to the resettlers, the idea was in essence to cover them up in a sense by including them under an expanded Chongqing at 82,000 or so square kilometers in size. There's a city, Chongqing, but there's also a municipality which is actually like a province now. Perhaps you can see it on the map in place. It has a number of York ties from Osgoode Hall Law School, the Asian Business Management Program, ULE, I think most recently the Faculty of Health, beginning to see what could be done as well. Well, at last, a sabbatical provided for a 2-year stay in Chongqing. I did have some wideband contacts, as I've said, so that was helpful, but nevertheless, that didn't open all doors. One had to reckon with local gatekeepers for the research to be successful. One of the gatekeepers, a key gatekeeper, turned out to be employed at the Canadian consulate in Chongqing, and for whatever reason adopted me and my interests and opened a lot of doors. And because of that person, I also gave about 10 talks to various universities in 3 different cities, spreading Canada around, but also collecting contacts and information for my own purposes, for sure. There were, of course, in addition, other local gatekeepers, one of whom was very, very important and very, very passionate about drinking Mao Tai. And indeed insisted that his students and his colleagues drink Mao Tai with him or be damned. So in grand anthropological tradition, I contributed 4 bottles of Mao Tai in my stay there. There also exists a videotape of my singing at a party in his honor. If you're going to China, as many of you know, you must know some songs, right? And I have 2 in my repertoire, Frere Jacques and Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. Okay? And I'm good at it. Okay? But it wasn't part of my PhD studies. So, local gatekeeper. Another local gatekeeper felt the burden of responsibility. I wasn't a student, I was a bloody professor from Canada with gray hair to match. So I think really my presence put them more open to surveillance from the city wideband, but it may also have provided some opportunities for them as well. That gatekeeper was particularly worried about my interest in going to a minority nationality area in Chongqing municipality. Why be worried? Well, because, this person said, it's an ethnic area. Oh. In the grand tradition of Chinese research by foreigners, there was every effort made to make sure that my research expeditions were accompanied by people who would keep an eye on what I was doing. I did my best to weasel out of that, but certainly at least one of my interpreters was told by this gatekeeper, don't translate anything political. And so we took that into account. I ended up at Southwest University, Shinan Daxue, 60,000 to 80,000 students, an ethnic studies institute, a group of researchers on the impact of the Three Gorges Dam as well, and so on. They treated me extremely well. As a foreign expert, well, talk about that. They provided an apartment suite, a computer, a TV, which sometimes received the BBC, sometimes with interesting blackouts, and of course lots of soap operas. It was wonderful. A restaurant a few yards away from where I was living, so I didn't have to worry about cooking. I could concentrate on research on my preparations for lessons. There was a kindergarten immediately beside my bedroom, so there was absolutely no danger of sleeping in. It was wonderful. I could watch the little kids at a certain point in time practicing the new game of, oh, hey, I'm an Olympic torch relayer, and so on and so forth. I was also teaching. One needs a local affiliation, is what I'm trying to say. And my teaching was part of the commitment that I was making. Teaching PhDs in English about qualitative research methods, teaching MA students about introduction to anthropology. They could care less. What they really wanted was to hear a native speaker of English talking. I taught on Mondays and Tuesdays, which meant the rest of the week was for research, laundry, language lessons, or whatever else might be coming along. Methods, I saw myself somewhat as Walter Benjamin's flaneur, intoxicated by all of the shock effects of Chongqing, trying to develop a montage of what all of this might look like and feel like and so on. I was out in Bay district in the north, far away from the downtown, but I tried to compare and contrast Bay and Jiefeng Bay and Yuzhou and so on in that way. Bay was wonderful. Clear, clean air. 30-minute walk every Sunday morning brought you to a farmer's market where you could admire and try to learn from the short, stocky men and women in the blue Mao jackets and what was happening in terms of food for sale, pets for sale, flowers, and dentistry in the street, and so on and so forth. Compared and contrasted to the taller and more fashionably dressed, more colorful bourgeoisie in the downtown. But the downtown area also had its homeless men, clearly, who would doss down under the incredible brand advertisements in Jiefeng Bay and Yuzhou. Another vignette, if you like. Bay on Christmas Eve. Yes, stores with Santa Claus. Yes, lit up trees. Nothing about a baby Jesus, of course. With the nearby KFC, which I sometimes as a lover of French fries would attend, singing on the muzak would be Christmas in Killarney, sung by somebody called Bing Crosby. It was wonderful. In the downtown, you also had people wearing bird face masks, people bashing each other with plastic Flintstones clubs and so on. It was a wonderful event on Christmas Eves. I had identified a particular ethnic group for study as an anthropologist, Tujiazhu, of whom there were at least 8 million in China, recognized by the state in 1957, over almost 1.5 million of them living in Chongqing. So that became, for this anthropologist, a point of interest as well. I tried to do some studies in a particular town in the municipality which had a strong Tujia presence. Particularly at Spring Festival. It was wonderful, the local performance of dragon lights, people roaming around with a lion dance and firecrackers, and an awful lot of ancestral focus in terms of red candles and burning of paper money and so on and so forth. And the main street of this town lit up with row after row after row of candles for that particular event. The hillside cemetery lit up as well from the burning of the paper and the candles and so on. You also had Tujia-style wooden housing on stilts, Jiaojiaolu housing, jutting out over the cliffside over the Green River below. And I compared that as well with, or contrasted with, a development zone in Chongqing, the Northern Economic Development Zone, with its private villas, its guarded area, its own golf course, its own school and hospital for Hong Kong and other expatriates who had come here to work, and so on and so forth. And this was an investment from a Hong Kong Christian family, it turned out. And the gift one was given, of course, was a copy of the Analects of Confucius as one left the inauguration of this particular event. I also focused on some specific research projects, most of which I hadn't really thought of before I actually got there. It was serendipitous or special. Looking at, for example, particularly at the impact on some Tuja of the Three Gorges project. And this also involved the Hubei province area, the Shenong River area, in which the emphasis was on the Tuja role of boat trackers, that is to say, of pulling the boats around the shoals in the old Yangtze River now being flooded. 1 minute to go. Thank you. So one got very intrigued by that. That's published in Asian Anthropology if you're really interested. But for me, that was a major thing, an impact of labor history and something really wonderful, I thought. I also did some studies on the rural-urban policy that came into effect in 2007 and so on. And that was marvelous as well, although one could only get so much of it done before one's time ran out. Last comment, two last comments. One of the things that also brought to bear was the World Bank's development report on shaping economic geography, which talks about the Chongqing as an example and so on, of inclusive urbanization, a very important topic which Chongqing was certainly pioneering at the time. Last comment here, I should also note, to tie all of my strands of my life history together, you could care less, but I find it interesting, is that Chongqing, by the time I was leaving, had also built up an investment. Where else? It's gone in West Africa. 谢谢你。